Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly analyze the tactical adjustments opposing teams are executing to contain Mikel Arteta's Arsenal. So in today's video, first we're going to focus on Everton's use of Doucouré, then we'll shift to Brentford's 5-3-2, and lastly we'll focus on Guardiola's shape and Man City's win over Arsenal. So when we break it all down and we do look at the board, we have Arsenal in a 4-3-3, and that's the system they've predominantly utilized throughout this season. And what we're going to focus on here is how teams have contained their overall attack that's resulted in Arsenal struggling to pick up points in the Premier League. We'll start with their game against Everton, and what we first have to look at is Arsenal's attacking shape when they push into the opposing side's half. We often see Arsenal shifting between a 4-1-5 with Thomas Partey as the sole pivot and Odegaard and Xhaka pushing forward, while we end up seeing the fullbacks adopt narrow positions. But for large spells of these previous games, we've seen them shift to a 3-2-5, which sees Gabriel shifting into that left center back role, and that's where you have Zinchenko tucking in towards the midfield zone to get on the ball. As stated in my previous video, Zinchenko has played a key role in Arsenal's build-up due to his passing ability, his ability to drag opponents towards him and carry the ball forward, and his ability to serve as an outlet to help Arsenal bypass the opposing side's midfield and front line. However, what we've seen in the past 3 games is that teams have been looking to hunt Zinchenko and ensure that he can't get on the ball, and forcing Arsenal out and towards the wide areas where they can double up and ensure that they have protection against the Arsenal wide players and often create 1v2s. And there are even situations where they have the midfielders shifting across to provide cover as well to ensure that Arsenal can't create overloads in those wider areas. In Arsenal's 1-0 loss against Everton were traditionally in a 4-3-3, but they spent large spells of that game without the ball and they dropped off into a 4-5-1. McNeil and Iwobi played a key role in ensuring that Martinelli and Saka couldn't get the better of Coleman and Mykolenko, but to be fair, Coleman and Mykolenko did a very good job in their 1v1 battles against the Arsenal wide players. Therefore, in that midfield zone, it should be Doucouré against Xhaka, Onana against Odegaard, and then Gay could pick up Nketiah if he drops deeper in towards that midfield area, or he could step towards Thomas Partey if he wants to be aggressive. However, what we ended up seeing here was that there were times where Odegaard and Xhaka looked to push beyond Doucouré and Onana, and if they weren't tracking their movement, Gay could shift across to pick up one of the spare men, or you'd simply see Cody stepping towards Xhaka, and you'd often have Iwobi tucking in to deal with Odegaard. From there, Onana could step towards Thomas Partey, and there was also the option to have Calvert-Lewin dropping off on towards Thomas Partey as well. But the key factor here was Doucouré constantly pushing forward to close down Zinchenko, ensuring that he didn't have any time on the ball, and that would ensure that Zinchenko and Thomas Partey were taken out of the game. Like I stated, they could have Cody or Gay shifting towards Xhaka, and there were times where Gay could shift towards Odegaard if Iwobi wasn't stepping towards him, or Onana wasn't dropped off deeper tracking his movement. The same thing applied in the wider areas when they had the 1v2s. You would see Xhaka looking to push forward, and they could simply have Cody or Gay dropping off to deal with that run, or Gay and Doucouré dealing with that run. And the same thing was applicable on the opposite flank. When Odegaard looked to push forward beyond Mykolenko, you'd see Tarkowski shifting across, and there were occasions where Onana tracked that movement and Gay shifted towards his left to ensure that it was 1v2 against Odegaard as well. Then when we shift to Arsenal's 1-1 draw against Brentford, they came up against a Brentford side playing in a 3-5-2 that dropped off into a 5-3-2 out of possession, and they defended well in a narrow, compact group of 8. They had the strikers dropping off deeper and they could sit in between Thomas Partey, and if Zinchenko moved into that central area, one of the strikers could pick him up as well. If Zinchenko was operating in a wider zone, then one of the shuttlers could step out to close him down. But what you end up seeing here is that they can go 3v3 in that midfield zone with Norgard tracking the movement of Nketiah dropping off deeper, or Odegaard and Xhaka looking to pick up the ball between the lines. But even if Arsenal looked to play in a 3-2-5, if Xhaka and Odegaard push higher up the pitch, Me and Ayer can close them down, and then they have the wingbacks dealing with Martinelli and Saka. What often happened in these situations was that Brentford were able to create a 2v3 with having the shuttlers drop off deeper, and from there they were creating 1v2s against Martinelli and Saka. And for instance, if Xhaka was pushing forward in towards the half space beyond those players, you would see Ayer and then Norgard shifting across to close him down to make it 1v2 as well. It ensured that Arsenal struggled to create combination play down that left-hand side, side. And even on the rare occasion where Xhaka was able to play the ball around Ayer for Nketiah, Pinnock tracked that movement well and was able to cut it out. And then even in the situation where Zinchenko received the ball centrally, the shuttler would push forward to close him down. You have the wing back that could deal with the wide player. And then if Xhaka pushed higher up the pitch, Ayer could close him down in that zone and it would be 3v3 as well. Whereas on the right hand side, Henry would receive cover from his shuttler and then Mee would push forward to deal with Odegaard. And ultimately with White often dropping off a bit deeper, regardless of Odegaard or Saka's positioning, they were often caught up in 2v3s in that right side area. If White did push forward, that would force the shuttler to close him down and it would leave Saka against Pinnock. And then even in that situation, similar to Xhaka's issue on the left hand side, it would be Mee and Norgard shifting across to make it 1v2 against Odegaard. Despite Brentford doing a very good job of ensuring that Arsenal couldn't play through the center of the pitch and ensuring that they had numbers out in the wider areas, it was down the right hand side where Saka's movement, along with some of White and Odegaard's overlapping runs, that got the better of Henry. And if you look at Arsenal's best chances throughout that game, it stemmed with that movement down that right hand side. And from there, they were able to score their sole goal, but still Brentford did enough to ensure that they had numbers in that midfield zone to force Arsenal in towards those wider areas where they were able to create advantages to ensure that Arsenal couldn't play around them. And then against Man City, where much can be said about Pep Guardiola's decision to use Bernardo Silva as a halfback once again, what we ended up seeing was that City out of possession looked more like a 4-3-2-1, and it had Grealish and Mahrez tucking in narrow to close down Jorginho and Zinchenko, who tucked in to make it a 3-2-5. Gundogan would track the movement of Odegaard, who was dropping off into space or looking to receive the ball deeper. And then that would leave De Bruyne to track the movement of Xhaka if he dropped in towards that midfield zone. In the case that Mahrez had to step forward to help Haaland by stepping towards Gabriel, you'd still see De Bruyne stepping into the path of Xhaka if he was in that midfield area. And then Rodri would push forward to close down Zinchenko, who would be unmarked in that central area. This was a reoccurring theme in that opening half, and there were even times where you witnessed Gundogan looking to step forward to make it a 3v2 and apply pressure against Zinchenko and Jorginho to ensure that Arsenal could lose possession in the middle third. So in possession, City were more of a 3-4-2-1 with Bernardo Silva deeper with Rodri, but out of possession, they dropped off into a 4-3-2-1, and that's where you saw Bernardo Silva operating as a left back. And in terms of how they looked to ensure that they closed down City, they had those wider players tucking in into narrow central positions to close down Zinchenko and Jorginho, and they were willing to allow Arsenal to play the ball out towards Tomiyasu, as he didn't serve as a legitimate threat to City's backline from a right back position. Ultimately, with Guardiola's decision to have Mahrez and Grealish stepping towards Jorginho and Zinchenko, and at times having Gundogan step into that zone, it forced Zinchenko out and towards the wider areas as well. But even in those situations, you had a good tracking job from the wider players to make it 1v2. And on several occasions throughout that game, whether it be Martinelli or Zinchenko from the left or Saka from the right, City ensured that they had the numbers to prevent an Arsenal overload. The one subtle change that Guardiola made at the start of the second half was pushing De Bruyne higher up the pitch to lead the press with Haaland, and that saw Mahrez and now Gundogan tasked with closing down Jorginho and Zinchenko when City pressed from the front. Ultimately, Guardiola did bring on Akanji for Mahrez, and he pushed Ake to a left back role, shifting Bernardo Silva to the right hand side, and from there City were more inclined to press higher up the pitch, and we witnessed examples where you ended up seeing Bernardo Silva stepping towards Gabriel while Gundogan and Kevin De Bruyne were closing down Jorginho and Rodri. And from there, what we ended up seeing following that change was that Haaland was stepping towards Saliba, De Bruyne was now pushing towards Zinchenko, Bernardo Silva was willing to step towards Gabriel if the ball was played into him, and that's where you ended up seeing Gundogan stepping towards Jorginho, and Grealish would tuck in to deal with Odegaard. If City were looking to press in that manner, that would leave Xhaka as the spare man, but there was one example where Ramsdale punted the ball in towards its path, and that's where you witnessed Rodri stepping forward to close down the Arsenal midfielder. But following that change, you witnessed City's press getting better. There were even times where you had Ruben Dias stepping in towards that midfield zone, looking to close down Odegaard and forcing him into deeper midfield positions. And ultimately, City's plan out of possession was to ensure that Arsenal's midfielders, including Zinchenko, couldn't get on the ball to dictate the tempo of the game. And there was one example in particular where you have Bernardo Silva and De Bruyne stepping towards Zinchenko on the ball. Gundogan's closer to Jorginho, and they force Zinchenko in towards the central area where he loses the ball. It falls to Bernardo Silva, and from here he could square it towards Haaland, but the pass is a bit short. It forces the striker to take the ball across Ramsdale, and his angle is cut short, and that results in Ramsdale saving it. And then even when you look to the press that resulted in Arsenal conceding possession for City's third goal, you have De Bruyne closing down Gabriel, Bernardo near Xhaka, you see Rodri pushing forward to close down Zinchenko, and you have Haaland and Gundogan near Jorginho, forcing the long ball back to City. So as you can see, opposing teams are now aiming to disrupt Arsenal's build-up through the midfield by negating their time and space on the ball, whilst ensuring they provide numbers in wide areas to prevent the overloads that proved beneficial towards Arteta's men's success this season.